Okay, I'm Bernard Green, and I'm chairing this Expenditure and Revenue Committee. This is our meeting for August 11, 2025. Let's start off by looking at the minutes of July 21st and July 28th. Does anyone have any corrections to those minutes? Dick?
Yeah, I did send a couple to Tiffany
Okay.
at all, and I confess I did it late. On the 7:21 minutes, there was a reference to new air arms. And I wasn't sure what that was, so that should be corrected, whatever it is. 7:28, a reference to street operating permits. And I think it should be street opening permits. And then finally, in the last paragraph on 7:28, I may have misspoken, but there was a discussion of the town school sharing of council as a revenue opportunity. And at the end of the paragraph, it referred to it as a possible cost savings opportunity. And if the reference to revenue sharing could be removed, I would appreciate that.
And you got that?
Yeah,
okay.
I did get that.
And by the way, again, I sort of messed up and didn't call roll.
Oh.
So let's do that first. And no one corrected me, okay? Or no one. So it's not just me.
More on a roll.
Okay. Let's see. Members of the committee, Dick Benka
Here.
Ruth Ellen Fitch.
Yeah.
Jeff Rudolph here. Sergio Modigliani.
Present.
Janet Gelbart.
Yeah.
Sadaf Kadmi. She
Just joined online.
Okay. Sarah Mukhtar, she's here. Yeah.
Yeah.
John Doggett here. John Van Skoyak, an alternate, is here.
Yes, online.
Jesse Hefter is Jesse here
On vacation.
on vacation. Okay, and Cliff Brown is here. So we have a quorum and let's be present. So going back to the minute, any further or other corrections? Okay, with those corrections, July 21st.
And the 28th.
Okay, so I move approval of the July 21st and July 28th minutes as amended by Dick Benka's corrections. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye.
We have to
Pardon?
call the roll.
Yeah, I'm looking for my list. of
No,
people.
I was calling Sarah.
Just chant
I was trying to get it over with.
Dick Benka.
Aye.
Ruth Ellen Fitch.
Uh,
Jeff Rudolph.
Abstain.
Sergio Modigliani.
Aye.
Janet Gelbart.
aye.
Sadaf Kadmi.
Aye.
Sarah Mukhtar.
Aye.
John Dogger.
Aye.
John Van Skoyak. I'm sorry, he's an alternate. Cliff Brown.
Alternate.
Yeah, you're an alternate too. Okay, and chair votes aye. So, thank you.
You only did one, we need to do 28, or did you do them both?
I thought we're doing both together. Okay. That's okay with everyone. Update on school questions. Discuss any response if received regarding the questions posed to the school, including with respect to an anticipated timeline for response. Do we have a report on that from anyone? No? Looking at you, like president of the school committee. Okay, so we'll just move on and hope that at some point we hear from the school committee.
We'll, on staff, we will follow up there.
Okay. Okay, next update on the Expenditure and Revenue Study Committee's Financial Model Subcommittee. Who's gonna?
The lead on that, but I'll let the committee, obviously, the subcommittee, come in as well. We have published, based on the responses we received from some of the communities that we reached out to, an initial memo, which is in your packet, summarizing the responses we received and drawing some initial recommendations from there. And I think the biggest top line thing that we've received, even from a relatively small sample size of respondents. I am still trying to encourage a couple of holdouts who have said they will fill this out to fill it out. Um, is that it is very difficult to do apples to apples comparisons of some of these things. And where it is possible, we are not seeing a lot of unity in the trends. With regard to whether it's things like shared services between the municipality and the schools, whether it is the budget for police and fire overtime. In one notable example, I got a response back saying that our increase in the budget for police overtime is zero for the last 4 fiscal years. I said, well, how can that be? And they said, well, we just use the reserve fund every year, so it's zero. Um, so, um, the numbers tell a different story than the material behind it. And so where it has been appropriate, I'm trying to do some of that deeper diving. But given the timeline that we are working on and the importance of moving the work forward so we're not spinning our wheels, I wanted to present some of these preliminary findings, but also some preliminary recommendations based on them. Um, for the first is the model itself regarding how we split our revenue. There are two major ways that communities in Massachusetts do this. One is the way that we do it currently, which is there are a certain number of shared expenses that are paid for by a pool of revenues that come in. And then once those shared expenses are paid for, there's a split between the town or the city and the schools, whereby the school district receives a certain percentage of the fund of the non-shared revenues, and the municipality receives the other percentage. The other way that this is handled is through growth in fixed, or is through growth in individual budgets. So rather than there being a set of shared expenses, although in some cases there are still shared expenses in these models. The budget for the town or the municipality and the schools is capped at a set percentage every year. Um, in some models, the communities actually break out special education and regular education, and special education prices are allowed to grow at a faster rate than regular education based on what the community is seeing. And then the budget cannot exceed those projected revenue growths. Um, in the case of Arlington, which is the most well-developed model, and also the community we got, I think, a lot of helpful feedback from. They structure this in such a way where they have a 3 or a 5 year override cycle. And unlike in Brookline, where we phase our overrides in over a period of time, Arlington realizes the revenue from any tax increase right away in year one, but does not spend it all in year one. They put everything above where they were going to everything above the budgeted amount for year one into an override stabilization fund that is then used in the event that expenses exceed revenues in the next few years of the override to cover those costs so that the community doesn't have to make cuts during the pendency of that override cycle or the pendency of a subsequent override. And it allows them to then budget responsibly up to that amount before another question is put on the ballot. With that said, as the subcommittee noted, that requires really a level of community engagement and analysis and trust, really, um, in that the community accepts that there is a process that they go through and that overrides are common. They're a regular occurrence. They're not large budget busting overrides, but they are overrides that are meant to ensure that every budget grows by a specific percentage every year towards goals that are clearly set out by the town's finance committee, which is their version of our advisory committee, which actually has a larger share of budgetary responsibilities in Arlington than our advisory committee does here. They're responsible really more for the financial plan aspect of that, which is now in our model under my office's purview. Um, so it's an interesting alternative model. I think there are things to think about in terms of how to, you know, basically provide for an escape valve of revenue in the same way that we've been talking about for the special education reserve fund. I think those are interesting questions, but it was my sense from the conversations with the subcommittee, that shifting the model, while potentially attractive, is also something that would likely cause a significant amount of questions and upheaval, given that our current model can function and has been functioning effectively and is easier to explain in some ways to the community. That at this point, their kind of sense of the group has been to retain the revenue split model, but take a hard look at what expenses are shared and why. So I'll pause there before I talk about shared expenses and see if there are any questions from the broader committee.
But
I would just add one other thing, which is that just because we raise the money and we put it into an account, it would not, if I understand it correctly, would not stop town meeting from deciding that it wants to go into that account. So it's not as if, that money is protected.
But I think the threshold for voting might be higher than a regular appropriation, so
Okay.
that would be.
It's a hurdle, but it's not.
It does offer the advantage of you're making money on the money. I don't know how much that is, and it could be substantial. It just depends on what's in there, and if we go back to 1% interest as the president wants, who knows? But that's sort of a plus and a minus.
May I ask, Chaz, what percentage of budget growth is assumed year to year? Inside regular education, special education.
So on the town side, I believe it's 3.25% in Arlington. On the school side, 3.75%, and in special education, 6.25%. And that changes with every override cycle. So they set new benchmarks when they call an override. That's my recollection is that's their current benchmarking.
any other questions, particularly from members of the committee or subcommittee?
I just wanted a clarification. Is it correct that we are legally allowed to put funds in an interest-bearing account as described?
It's called a special purpose stabilization fund, Sergio. We have one currently for opioid funding and for HCA funding. And we also just have our stabilization fund. But you could earmark dedicated revenue to a special purpose stabilization fund.
And presumably the interest returns to that same fund?
Yes.
And are you limited in what kind of assets you can hold?
I think it's the same rules that apply to the general fund revenue in general. There's the legal list that Lincoln's allowed to invest in.
Thank you.
And were those accounts set up because those different types of expenses tend to be unpredictable? Is that the?
No, so as an example, the opioid stabilization fund, there are rules around what we can and can't spend on. And so it's basically dedicated revenue for the dedicated expense. It's a way to segregate it.
Right, I understand that, yeah.
Yeah, so we set that up because the state at the time that the funds were coming in hadn't yet figured out how communities were going to be accepting this money. And they've actually since made it a little easier, but since we've set up the stabilization fund, we're still kind of going through the model that we chose. So I think for Arlington, it's just a way for them to segregate the funds so that it's not spent for another purpose.
Okay.
And I believe the percentages that they look at is it a rolling 3-year thing average that they look at to set the rate? So it's not what we're seeing just today, but this is what our experience has been over time. And this is therefore our hope that this is how it continues going forward.
Right.
It's probably based on their financial model, their forecast.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, Chad, move on.
Thank you. Moving on to this question of shared expenses and shared services. Right now in the community, there are a number of expenses that are shared above, quote unquote, above the line, meaning that those are paid out before the remaining revenue is split. Our general recommendation is that where possible, those expenses move below the line. and be realized by bodies that are incurring them. And the rationale for this is that where our big overarching concern now is in healthcare. Healthcare costs have increased by double digits for the last 3 years. They're going to increase again this year, probably by as much or more. It is a runaway growth to the point where, communities are considering petitioning the legislature to exempt healthcare costs from Prop 2.5. That's how significant those costs are. When they are above the line, how that manifests in our budgets, the budgets of the municipality and the schools, is in a decrease in revenue. And that poses two kind of problems for us. The first is an optics problem. The school committee members know that when they had to make those hard decisions about budget cuts, some folks poured through the budget, looked at the revenue numbers and said, hey, wait a minute, our projected revenues are lower than what the town said they'd be this year. What the heck? Is the town hiding money from us? And the answer was no, we're not hiding money. We just don't have money to go around because it's being sunk into healthcare before the revenue split even happens. So it's not felt directly in people's budgets in a way that is tangible. It's just reflected in the increase or decrease in revenue. And the other thing is because those costs are, because the benefit costs and the healthcare costs are above the line, when a decision is made to increase or decrease headcount, the benefit into, or the increase in the budget, increase in revenue from, or the decrease in expenditures from cutting positions is split and not directly felt. And an increase in headcount, an increase in expenditures is also spread and not felt. It's reflected in that reduction in available revenues, but it is not directly reflected on the balance sheets of the municipality and the schools. And given that 88% of townside expenses are personnel and benefits, and 86% on the school side, I believe, are personnel and benefits. It makes intuitive sense for the body incurring the expenditure to realize it on its books. And we see this, for example, when we talk about the World Languages program. When the decision was made to eliminate the K-5 World Languages program, there was a projection in savings of a certain amount of full-time employees. And as a result of those reductions, an exemption was made to the traditional town school split, where we said, all right, 30 positions being saved, that projected revenue will go directly 100% to the schools rather than through the split, given that they are reducing that accordingly. When the actuals came in, we didn't see a 30-person reduction in headcount. So because numbers went up elsewhere, it's not clear to us on the town side what happened there. But the net minus 30 FTE positions that were projected from that reduction in staff never materialized. And I don't know the degree to which the schools were able to know that. Hey, your headcount didn't actually go down. And so the benefits that you're getting from this are not actually, are not real. They're illusory. And so it's important, I think, when you make a decision like that, to have the impact of it directly reflected on your side of the balance sheet. And so wherever possible on these things, it makes sense in our minds to have those, when you have those expenses, have them reflected on the side of the person, on the side of the entity that's incurring the expense or cutting the expense. So that's the first sort of recommendation there. I will say that's not applicable to everything. For example, debt service should remain above the line. The recommendation there. I'm sorry, Sadaf has her hand up.
Are you done?
Yeah.
I wanted to
No,
sort of.
I welcome any interruption you've got.
Thanks. There were a couple of questions, and for the benefit of the rest of the group that I had about this. The first is if you were to move additional items below the line, there's an operational burden, right, for lack of a better term, the schools would incur. And so it's important for the schools to think through, well, what would that actually look like, and how would you operationalize management of that incremental funding? The second thing is that if there are additional items, again, moved below the line, the schools are, at their core, their objective is to provide services, educational services to students. And that does mean that, you need to think about what the incentive structure is, for lack of a better term, where there have been some, times where the schools have made decisions to defer certain building maintenance or other line items because they have to continue to provide educational services to students. And so that's something, again, I'm interested in hearing from the school committee as well on, but I think there's sort of a question about the implications from an incentive perspective, sort of on the other side, that also needs to be considered. And then I had a final point, which now is escaping me, but I'm sure I'm sure it'll come back. Oh,
Sergio?
actually, sorry, the final point, let me chime in here, because I did remember it. I think it would be helpful to look at, for whatever is proposed to be moved below the line, to take a look at the last 3 years, 5 years, whatever that is, to understand what that would have meant for the total amount of revenue that the school has, the entire school system has, in order to operate the school system, and sort of, what that would have looked like, and then ultimately, obviously, what it does to the overall split numbers.
So I can kind of respond to a couple of those points. So I think the first one is, I don't know that it would work any differently than it does now. It would just be that the schools would be more tuned into the ramifications of the decisions that they're making and what that does to their share of revenue. So it would almost revert back to the way the split used to work before it got revised a few years ago. So, the enrollment assumptions that we're making, town and school, we would make sure that, if they're planning on growing FTEs, they need to notify us so that we can build those into our assumptions. I am working on recasting this for 24, 25, and 26. Right now, it looks like the 60-40 split would shift to 55-45. And then there is some adjustment that needs to be made. I'm kind of going back in time and trying to recalibrate the way the benefits would have shaken out, and that's becoming a little bit more cumbersome than I thought it would be. As an example, what do you do in a situation where you have a healthy fund balance in the unemployment trust fund, which we do, but then in those years, the draw on the unemployment fund is school related, and how do you kind of recapture that as you need to build the fund balance back up? And then I think, I need to dig a little bit deeper on the group health history. And especially, Chaz was talking about the world language adjustments. We didn't build that into our assumptions in fiscal 25, but we thought there would be savings coming out of that, and that didn't materialize. But in 26, we did reduce the budget based on the reductions that the school department made. So in October, while you're looking at enrollment, I'm going to be looking at group health enrollment and verifying that the positions and savings that we reduced materialize. And if they don't, then we'll have a conversation about, what happened, what changed. But, that one I have, plans and employees associated with the reductions that we made so that we can verify that.
Okay. So,
Thank you. Part of my question, I think, has been answered. It was really to follow on Sadaf's suggestion of modeling a few past years to sort of understand what that looks like. It sounds like that's underway. The other sort of thing that I keep running across are that the decisions about what's above and what's not have a number of decisions which seem accidental. I was interested to learn, for example, from the presentation of the police department that school crossing guards apparently are carried in her department. And this is just one silly example. These are small amounts. They're certainly not going to tilt things one way or the other. But it comes back, I think, to the question that if we're going to really be serious about examining a restructuring of how things are done, it implies to me a kind of a fine-tooth comb to try to understand all of the pieces. So just a comment.
Like
Sarah,
really, sorry, go ahead.
no, go. You're gonna answer him.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which,
And
sorry.
Okay, Sarah?
did you hear what he said?
No.
Chas, can you repeat?
Oh, I wanted to, you can go ahead and then I'll answer after you've spoken.
Hadn't heard that.
Okay, I'm going to ask a different question, so would you go ahead and answer?
Okay, sure, got it. I think it's a point well taken, Sergio, and that is something that we're doing as we kind of dig through this. There are certain costs that are carried on the town side that are not part of the town's assessment to the schools. And with that said, there are also certain costs that are kind of inextricable. And then there's a question. So there's a question of what's the utility necessarily in those assessments. And so we want to be to your point in analyzing that kind of at a granular level. We also want to be fair and be clear that there are costs that obviously, for example, I spend several hours of my day dealing with school issues. Am I billing the schools? No, that's not right. That's expected of me. Whereas there are plenty of other areas like groundskeeping that are where I think there's more of a question there of what's the resource being provided? How are we funding it now? And how can that be addressed and accounted for, which is really the second part of this recommendation about shared services, which is clarity in responsibilities, roles and responsibilities. Right now, the only major operative MOUs, written documents delineating these responsibilities that have been signed in the last 10 years have been with the rec department solely for adult and community education, which was, a couple months ago, and with the health department. That's it. The IT agreement dates back to 2002, I think, 2003. The rest of the rec department dates back to 1995. Some departments don't have a document. The building department's original founding document, public buildings, dates back to 1993. We know it exists, but we can't find it. We've gone down to the clerk's office. We have not been able to locate that document in either of the schools. So this is really the critical issue for us, which is if we're going to, regardless of where these services reside, regardless of who performs them and how, there needs to be a really clear set of policies in place that lay out the roles and responsibilities of the constituent bodies and that are insulated from pressure on one side or the other, either pressure on the select board to cut back on services or pressure on the school committee to cut back on services by going through the town school partnership. That's what the town school partnership is really supposed to be, is a space where those two bodies, with the assistance of the advisory committee, can meet and jointly agree that we're not going to change anything unless both sides agree, unless you have enough votes from both bodies to, materially change an agreement between the two parties. And so that's the kind of structure on shared services that we're recommending. And again, that's not to say every service needs to be shared. One of the things that we highlighted, for example, is human resources. Human resources for the school side is a specialized service, particularly when it comes to hiring teachers. We're not suggesting consolidating all of that in Ann's office, but there are certain things like benefits that can be consolidated and are already partially consolidated. So you really do have to take that fine-tooth comb to it. And then when you have established, all right, what's being provided and what is the cost, what are the expectations for growth, you have to document and memorialize that in a way that the bodies can then provide confidence to each other. We're not going to have a situation like we had this year where, to Sadaf's point, repair and maintenance gets level funded when there's already this growing backlog. So that's this kind of second aspect of this shared services recommendation, is clear policies, clear memorandums of agreement between the bodies that are mutually enforceable by the town school partnership, so that you have clarity and consistency going forward.
So let me just follow up for a minute. And again, forgive me, I'm talking out loud, so these are not well digested. But we all tend to have a sort of a simplistic look at, cost of educating a student per pupil per year. And as we juggle the numbers and where they fall, the services that are required are not changing. And therefore, in pulling things apart, to your point about keeping an eye on where shared services actually add efficiency. I was, for example, favorably impressed by the presentation of the town's legal department, suggesting as an example some opportunities for working on behalf of the schools. So there's a kind of a strange tension in on one hand, pulling this apart to separate out the numbers, and on the other hand, the danger of truly suggesting that it's every tub on its own bottom, when in the end, it's all of us trying to carry the tub. That's all, just a comment.
Okay, Sarah?
So I have three different questions. So why don't I start with one and then we can see where we get to. So I was wondering if you could help me understand more about what type of control the schools would have over a line item it was put below the line. Like I totally understand that it's helpful for understanding the responsibility, and that's something that's the responsibility of the schools. But what types of decisions would we be able to have after doing that we don't have now?
So the unemployment is probably a good example. Your unemployment costs have gone up, and I flagged this for Bella as an area that they should be looking into. And I don't know that there's full participation in the unemployment hearings. So if people don't show up to defend the town's case, then typically that gets ruled in favor of the employer, the former employee. And so the growth in those costs is probably because there's been less presence to manage that. And then even FTE decisions, a lot of times when we get department heads that are asking for positions, we immediately are throwing the group health cost on there because we know that's going to be something that comes back to roost. And so kind of just being more mindful of that as you're making decisions about adding headcount.
Okay. When you said that you estimate that the town school partnership would change, and you cited 45 to 55%, 45, 55 instead. I was wondering if, as we make the transition, the transition from things being above the line to go below the line, if you would be adjusting that split so that it would be a little bit easier for the schools to react to the change in funding that could potentially happen next year, because the transition period will be a hard point.
Actually, the year that I chose as like the starting point, you actually benefit from the change because you've got to remember that you don't pay for pensions right now, and so that's a major cost in the overall benefit picture, and so that kind of slides things a little bit more towards the town in terms of expenses. So. But we can go through kind of what the current split is and kind of the way that we're looking at how it's split when it's segregated town and school as well.
I would love to be part of that conversation to understand like how you got to the idea that on a particular year that would be 45, 55 instead of, because it would help understand like the not assumptions that go into that, but the learning that I have to do that goes into that. I just wanted to say to Chaz's point, I think that one of the concerns that I have is that if there's a shared service and so let's take general counsel, and general counsel had the lawyers that we would keep on might be the ones that the town has employed for a while. If the schools weren't the employers of the lawyers, it would be difficult for us to get the responsiveness that we need for our issues. So it's something that's hard to agree to, but if there is a sense of collaboration that would happen before that happened, where, it would be a new agreement that the schools had as much input into how it goes, then that's a different situation. So I just wanted to say that.
Really good point. And I've been trying to, emphasize that actually, that it goes both ways, right? That it's not just about, the expectation on the town side, we provide X service, the schools pays us X money. It's in the provision of the service, we have an obligation to the schools as a client that must be upheld, right? And so that responsiveness is, integral to that. And I think, right now, for example, I think Susan does a great job in town council's office does a great job at trying to be responsive to the school committee's needs. And if we were able to dedicate, say, services like that full time to you, then that's the model, right? It wouldn't be just set it and forget it. There's important work to be done on our end to make sure that the schools are satisfied with the level of service they're receiving.
Yeah, I don't think that has been historically necessarily the case. So let's just be careful.
Okay, Dick?
Yeah, I am grateful that you're doing this, and I thank you. I really see this as something more than a bookkeeping nicety, but as a tool that will provide some incentives for both the town side and the school side to think more carefully about head counts, about adding, about possible efficiencies to provide the services. And I think, given the importance that healthcare and health insurance is providing, the cost of it that it's adding, particularly at the 83% that it's costing the town and the schools. I think that that has to be a reality as managers on both sides are making decisions. And I think, Sergio, school crossing guards, for example, they're going to be there, I think, no matter who pays,
Exactly.
whose budget they come out of.
That's right.
But that is not true of necessarily of other positions. That I think services can be provided in a more efficient way. And that is something that should be incentivized. And I think this provides one avenue for doing that.
Let's take a really concrete example of that. So if you're looking at efficiencies and, it's really important to try to reduce the number that we put out for salaries, then of course it would make sense to make classes larger, right? But if you're really interested, as the school department is, in student outcomes, that's not as obvious of a decision to make, right? So it's tough to share those decisions.
Well, I mean, we can certainly talk, for example, some of the figures you sent me about the DESE requirements for staffing versus what the schools might do. There are and really looking at what the outcomes are and what is necessary as input to those outcomes.
I think that's where too, it's so critical to have expectations set at the beginning, because if what matters in any of these particular instances is a bottom line of what are the metrics of success? If the metrics of success are student achievement levels at X rate, and that is directly related to a service that is shared, then that is what should go into any sort of document between the town and the schools about the provision of that service. If it's not student facing, then what are the other metrics of success? I think to your point, Sarah, there have been complaints about responsiveness on the town side to some of the areas where there's shared services now, and that's got to be corrected. And a way to correct that is to have clear, boundaries and parameters so that it doesn't all live in a department head's head, or on the school side in, the best practice doesn't get lost in the turnover. There's something clear that can guide them on that. So I take your point.
And I think what really we all want is to be able to collaborate and trust back and forth between school and town. And that's one of the things that we haven't done very well so far, right? So I enjoy coming here and having these conversations because I feel like we could grow in that area, right? And there are efficiencies to be had while you still have excellent schools and excellent student outcomes. And there's ones that that don't make sense to make those changes on. And if the town and the people sitting around the table here have a trust that the schools will make those decisions well in a way that, dollars equal student outcomes, then there's I think greater chance for us all to succeed going forward. But that trust seems to be lacking sometimes.
Okay, which one of this?
Good, well, go ahead, Jen.
Okay, so I'm now getting confused because I think of this as what the schools are responsible for are their direct costs. And the things that they get from the town are sort of indirect costs, which is what I was in the nonprofits that I worked for. We still had to provide service to everybody because the things needed to get done. So I don't hear us talking about the town taking on things that are direct responsibilities of the schools. I think it's more clarification and using the example of legal services, for example. What I heard in the presentation, and it's wonderful because we all hear our own things, was if I were to take this on, this is from town council, I would need another body. I can't do it with the staff I have now, but if I had a body, we could provide a better service at a more reasonable cost to the schools. So
Van
that's,
outside council,
excuse me?
van outside council.
Yes, because you just know more. Having worked, I mean, one of the downsides of always contracting out is their costs just go up. It's hourly. I think on the town side, we see it a lot in building services because we can't find the expertise we need in-house. And if the rate out there, just goes up by 50%, we either are getting 50% less service or scrubbing something else. So I think it would be helpful to look at what Melissa comes up with as, we attach numbers to everything. Because I don't think I haven't heard anybody say, good, we're gonna grab all this money back and ship things. I was sort of surprised when Melissa said it would be 55-45. I'd want to see what's driving it. And then maybe that means something else gets adjusted because the intent is not to harm the schools. My reason for being here is to maybe finally get some clarity on how the schools manage their money, which hasn't been very good. and there are many reasons for it, but my initial response before we met with Dr. Givens, Cliff had shared some numbers with me, is, well, if you had a control system, it wasn't working. The purpose of a control system is to make sure these things don't happen. And I think that's sort of where we want to be with all of this. The purpose of changing the partnership is to make sure that we get the best services for the town as a whole, which includes the schools, which, for me, one of the big issues is the buildings, because that's a town asset. And it shouldn't be up to the schools to say, we'll let the asset slide because we need to do this for the kids. If we need to do this for the kids, we need to have a larger conversation that figures out how to get them both done.
Yeah.
Two things. First, 55-45. I think just throwing that out without some context, sort of like makes everyone sort of, huh? Remember that the allocation to the schools, the $146 million, that's about what, 34% of the overall pie. Okay, it's the allocation of other costs that bring you up to the 60-40. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that $146 million is not, you go 55-45, that's not going to change. It is it's the amount that is quote unquote allocated, but you're not getting it anyway. So if the town has more healthcare costs, that's why the town is getting a bigger percentage of those things when they go move below the line.
Completely.
Debt service.
Yeah.
More goes towards the schools, but so to me, that's just sort of like it's an accounting. But in terms of the money that the schools are getting to spend for an education, it's not going to change from what you're getting right now. So that's number one. I think these models will help everyone see that a little bit better. The other question or curious, the comment about student outcomes. And tracking that to investment. Does that, I mean, I take away from that there are going to be metrics that the school department is going to come up with that will allow the community to actually understand and evaluate how the schools are doing in a way that people don't seem to feel that they can evaluate now. Because that very issue, something that the advisory committee, talked about 3 or 4 years ago. And, we'd love to see metrics. I think
We do see some metrics right now. Would like to see more intense metrics. We have MCAS scores, we have attendance, we have how many students stay in school all the way through. We have how many students go on to college, right? There are metrics for you. We would like to see more.
Well, yeah, there are the metrics that everyone can see in DESE. Okay. MCAS scores, we've always been told to ignore those because they don't matter, that you don't think about them when you're teaching. So they don't mean anything to us. Attendance, yeah, sure. I guess it's a question of what do you mean by, positive student outcomes as a whole? And whatever is there, it clearly wasn't telling people or showing people that the money that was being spent, that you were getting the appropriate return on your investment. And I don't know what the answer is. I think what the suggestion was to go outside and find some information about how do school systems answer the question of how do you know you're doing a good job? And we don't need to get into that today.
We have award-winning middle schools in our town, right, that are in the top 10 in the state. We have a high school that I would, argue has students that graduate from it that are, well-spoken, well-written. We do know that we have excellent schools. We're spending money for a reason. It's not.
As I said, we shouldn't get into this now because we'll go down a rabbit hole in terms of looking at things, but I think it's a conversation that, people should have. Because when you say student outcomes, people are going to ask the question, what are they?
So I do believe that there's MCAS. I don't believe that MCAS is insignificant. I don't ever say that you don't pay attention to it.
I'm not here to debate it. I'm just saying that that's something that people are going to be very interested in getting in deeper on.
And I am too. I agree with you that it's important when you, whatever industry you're involved in, you want to make sure that you have metrics to show that you're succeeding in what you're doing. I think it's more the framing that I have trouble with because, it's much more personal for me than most people around the table because I have kids, right, who are in our schools right now, who I've chosen to keep in our schools because they receive a great education there. And so it's just the framing of, it's not that we're spending dollars willy-nilly right here and not getting outcomes, right? You want more outcomes of what you want. Yeah.
My 3 kids went to Brookline Public Schools all the way through.
Yep.
All right. And yeah, they graduated 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's not so long ago that these questions were not in people's minds.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I agree too. I think that you and I, we've spoken to each other enough to to see that you and I personally have a lot of shared values about education. And I really think that that there's things that we're happy about our schools. It's just the framing. It's the sort of deficit framing of an excellent system that educates kids every day, and that's important to me because I believe that we are doing work and we will continue to do work. And so sometimes we're not going to be able to deliver on the level that you personally want us to, but we are delivering,
Let me be clear, this is not about
Wait,
me, it's really about what I know other people, and certainly people on the advisory committee are going to hear and what they're going to then.
And I appreciate that because that helps advise me to what I should remember to be the messages I should be speaking to. So that's helpful.
Right. Chaz and then Sadat.
I had her hand up first, sorry.
Pardon me?
Beth had her hand up first there.
Sorry.
Thanks. This conversation reminds me of a conversation we had early in this process, and we talked about defining what our values are or our priorities are as a community, and then looking at how we measure those. And so I want to highlight that as this debate or this discussion, which I think is incredibly important. We talked about excellent education. Sarah, I think you had brought that up as being a critical priority for this community. And then there's a question about how we measure it. And I do think that it is helpful for us to sort of go back to that and actually complete that process. And I don't know where that is in sort of the timeline, the evolution of the work that this group is doing. But I do think that not having aligned on some of those things early, causes these conversations to happen, which again are good conversations, but I think that we want to sort of finish the swing on it, so to speak, and have that discussion. What are the priorities? What does it mean for that to be a priority? Then even in light of some of the work that is being done on the split and the financial model, I think it's helpful to look at that in light of the priorities that we are looking at as a community. So I think that would actually help facilitate maybe a more effective conversation on this topic.
Chaz?
Just to build off that, I think one of the things that the select board has been doing that's been really helpful to us on staff is doing this deeper dive into goals, objectives, and metrics of success. The select board is now in the process of building out a 5-year roadmap. So by 2030, what do we want to have accomplished? What does that look like? Who is responsible for it? How will we know if we get there? And then that also frees them up. You have this big picture, sort of 5-year analysis to then focus on more granular goals for the next fiscal year. By FY27, I want X miles of road. If that's just an example metric. That might not be the metric that you want. For example, it does matter how the road gets paved. So, but like having those discussions, I think is really critical for all of us, and to then have those discussions with the schools on shared services. What does success look like to you? How can we, and if those things differ, how do we iron that out? That's really important on our end. I go back to 2 conversations on the school side. One, again, about world languages, this idea that what metrics of success were we measuring, and did we meet those metrics of success with a new program? It was hard to then have that discussion when the program was on the block, as opposed to prior, being able to say we have laid out these clear metrics for success every year. We know whether or not this program is meeting them, but to instead have that conversation suddenly as part of a deficit discussion, I don't think served program or the school committee well, right? I think the school committee was then left in a really hard position. Similarly, on the issue, one of the issues that came up, and I apologize, Sarah, you probably know better than I do about the specific thing, where Dr. Schmuckler was talking about the level of services being provided at the elementary school level from, I believe, a paraprofessional provider. And there was, the reflexive response, which I think is totally understandable, is, well, that's a student-facing service. I don't know if, we shouldn't be touching that. And then Dr. Schmuckler saying in response to that, well, the actual impact to the educational model will be negligible because of these reasons. Because if what you ultimately want is X, then you're still going to get it without necessarily this model of this level of service being provided. I thought that was really interesting, and it's an area where I took away on the town side, a desire to do the same thing. And I think it's something that I want to discuss as we progress from this discussion into some of the stuff we talked about last time with the town side of the budget, about metrics of success, comparable communities and what's going on there.
Yeah,
I would take it back even further because you have to understand the people who don't have kids in the school. I started to broach this with you before the meeting. I have no idea what an education should be now. I know it shouldn't be what I had. I thought my daughter had a pretty good education, but we don't know the building blocks, and there's so much churn around us, and there's so much that has changed. So if you're looking for community support, it has to be, this is what we need, because what I hear and what I feel personally is, as a taxpayer, I shouldn't have to pay so that every kid gets into Harvard if anyone still wants to go there. It can, that's the level that those of us who don't have kids in the school, we have no idea what you guys are talking about. There is this very positive, we love kids. Kids need to be educated. A lot of times what I hear here, I go back to my grandchildren in Natick and say, what's going on there? I think they're getting an excellent education. Why? Because they reason through things. Is that something you can measure? Absolutely not. But it would help me to just understand, what are the basic building blocks? What does everyone have to have? What can we do for those kids who can do more? What do we have to do for those kids who can't even get to that level to get to that level? And that's a lot less detailed than metrics than anything else, but just gives me it's basic definitions of what education means today. I don't
So
know if
you're
that's
not, you're
helpful
not,
to you.
you're not doubting that it's happening in the schools. You're saying it's a communication issue, that we're not communicating what we're
I'm
doing.
saying what I'm hearing is we spend an awful lot. The schools get everything, and what are they getting? So somehow it's one of the things I mentioned to you, all these AP classes. What are they? Do we need them? I remember Helen Charlevsky talking about how many courses we offer at the high school, and it's, do we need to? So it's that kind of basic, and it doesn't mean measuring anything. It's starting with a definition. And then you can talk to me about how you measure whether you're doing it successfully or not. But I, at this point, don't know the basic, it used to be reading, writing, arithmetic. That doesn't cut it anymore. And certainly the way they did it when I was in school, and I went to school in New York City. So, my classes were overcrowded. We didn't have anyone in the schools who was not regularly developing. I don't know what they did with the other kids. Kids got warehoused. Kids with behavioral problems were, off this way and just pushed through till they reached the age that you could let them go. I know we do better than that, but I just don't know anymore what it is. And I'm just too far removed, and there's a lot of
So that's,
people who
that's a
live
commu-
here
that's a
who are, yeah.
communication issue.
But it's of a
So-
definition. I need to start with a definition of what it is we do with our kids.
So we have, a
Yeah, we
mission
don't have to do it
statement.
here. Yeah.
Okay.
I've read.
I just want to point out to you that I think that what you're talking about is a communication issue and not a suspicion that schools don't educate kids. I think that you'd like us to communicate better what we do.
Yeah, I mean, I read your mission statement. When I was on advisory, it just doesn't change. Our goal is to, have kids who do this, but there's nothing behind that lets me know what it is. And it's a hard thing because we're not talking objectively. Your objective isn't that every child scores XYZ. There's a lot more to educating the kid and to the kid than what his scores are. That's the problem we have with a lot of our metrics. It doesn't tell me, okay, so how I hear it from seniors, we want to know our kids are educated and can participate in their democracy, that we're raising kids who understand their culture, and can succeed. And there's lots of different ways to succeed. So
You know, I'm so sorry that I'm about to leave. It has nothing to do with what's going on. I'm going to leave at 5:30 anyway.
Can I just add one thing, sir? I mean, it's nice to say that we do these things for our students, and they come out excellent students. They went into the system as excellent students, right? From very highly educated, very motivated parents. And I think what I'm getting Janet saying is that really doesn't tell us anything.
Yeah.
Because of course, if your students are excellent going in, they're going to be excellent going out. So, or whatever that.
thank you, Sarah. I hope you didn't feel that we were coming down.
No, of course we weren't.
One of the things I think would be interesting is, and I'm getting it from some of the services that are being delivered at the high school by adults and by teachers and by support staff, is the sources and uses of funds. I think we talked about, obviously, we think the school committee pays for it, but we seem to be talking about some, at least portion of salaries that are paid for by town money, but not school money. And that's the kind of interest that I would have, because it's not, I'm not really frankly concerned about the delivery of the services, because my kids went to the high school and went through the whole system, graduated, and did great as adults and grown-ups, etc. I am totally satisfied. I worked for the system as the medical coordinator for a number of years, before I went to law school. But I think it's important to know the sources of funds. I think we've talked about a couple of services that are being delivered partially by school money, but then by, it sounds like, town money. I think that's really an important note to pay attention to and to hold people accountable, hold service deliverers accountable.
It may be worthwhile, so I'm not sure that everyone's seen it. If we have, then people just might not be remembering it, to understand what is above the line and how that separates out from the money that the town gets to spend and the schools get to spend on operations, because that's really sort of the distinction about above and below. You know, obviously things like benefits come into play, and I think having people be aware of that cost is going to be really helpful if we go that way. But otherwise, I think there's a lack of common shared knowledge about, gee, what's all this other money, and you know, who's spending it, who gets it, and why. And I don't know, it'd be that difficult to do. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think when we first kind of did the overview, we did talk about what was above. I mean, the things that are above the line are debt service costs, our special appropriations with the CIP, the reserve fund, non-appropriated funds, and then things like our general insurance, liability fund, and stabilization fund. And so those are all kind of things that they're all directly related to our fiscal policies. They all have dedicated sources of revenue. So it makes sense that those stay above the line. And then the things that are below, I think, you know, there are things that are below that are assessed, like building services, like IT. But then there are things that are also in town departments that are not assessed. Crossing guards is an example, but groundskeeping is probably one that in recent years we've seen increases in that we've had to absorb because there is no assessment. So, you know, I think this is something that we talk about annually with advisory as well, because we try and show the fully allocated budget. Charlie Young is in the process of doing the end of the year report for the schools, where he is compiling all of the town expenses on behalf of the schools, and we'll be giving that to them for their DESI reporting. But yeah, I think that, you know, a lot, because the debt service numbers are so large, it is a big chunk coming off the top, but a lot of that is related to debt exclusions. And so there, it's not even available revenue if the town decided that they didn't want to do it.
And things like groundskeeping, you don't want to have grounds employees with both systems. So that's why it's on the town and that's why it's allocated in situations like that.
It might be helpful, Melissa, if you could show the sources that go with those dedicated things so that people recognize it's not that we, that all the money comes into one pot and we're taking out what we spend on debt service. The money in the pot that goes out for debt service comes in for debt service. So maybe labeling some of those would be helpful.
Okay, Sergio?
Well, my point here, I think, is what Cliff is suggesting, and I would concur, is we need a graphic. We need a picture that one can look at, perhaps, rather than verbiage or text. And I say that coming from a position of somebody who I think is probably generally more familiar with town and town budgeting and school budgeting. And yet I too have these similar kinds of questions. Do you think that it's possible to create a simple diagram that would begin to lay out above and below and to get us started, and then perhaps elaborate on that after we can see that as to some of these more nuanced points?
Could one of us possibly take the stuff that's in the budget book already? Because you have 3 or 4 different pie charts and you go through those and you ultimately get to where the point, but I think being able to identify in one of those pie charts, here are all those things that are above the line, for example, and then show how it moves over. I think could be as simple as that.
Yeah.
And there's a diagram in there.
On your point there on the budget book. I went through the budget book and there is a pie chart which describes the total, the 60 or 59 or 58%. It doesn't say how many dollars are in it. You have to do a calculation, which by the way is 82 million. So we've got $82 million of town expense, which is dedicated to education of schools. And there's no indication of what that's about. I assume it's debt service. I assume it's
30 million of that.
all those things.
So,
But it'd be great if we could have a detailed line item of that missing 82 million. It's there in the budget, but the descriptions are missing as to the composition.
Yeah, and then just pair it with, and this is the money that comes in. So it's not like we're taking it from someone or giving it from someone. There's a specific pot of money that pays for it. So it's off the table, plus and minus.
Okay, any further discussion on that topic?
Two questions on GIC. I remember quite a while ago now, I guess it was, that we voted to go into GIC because it's such a good deal. And I believe for the first few years,
Saved us $5 million at the time, yes.
What else? What happened? But let's ask, what did we replace? And is it possible or is it conceivable to going back to that position? Number one. Number two, Newton, I believe, has changed for new employees, the percentage that they pay into the healthcare system. I don't know the details. Is that something that we're considering, or we should be considering, that this committee should be considering?
Yeah, so when we entered the GIC, the rules were different. A few years after our entry point into the GIC, the law changed, and so the threshold for entry was a lot lower. And so hindsight's 2020, and the shift to 8317 was done as a way to encourage the PEC, the Public Employee Committee, to enter the GIC. And the only way to change any of the rules around that is to get a majority of the PEC to agree to that as well. So it's a very high standard. The majority of the vote lies with the school union. And so that has to be your starting point. In terms of other providers, I think that they are actually seeing higher percentage increases for group health. I've talked to some of the other communities. I'm a member of the Mass Municipal Association. We just had our summer meeting. few weeks ago, and, they were seeing 23% increases. And, I do think that there's a benefit to being in a large pool. And, for the very beginning of our experience in the GIC, we've benefited from that. But the most recent years, I think it's, COVID hangover plus GLP-1 impact on the overall claim experience that we're kind of seeing coming to roost. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there, is a broader effort to do some design plan changes, which, we're hearing that the governor had a proposal to try and do something mid-year. Not sure if that will go through, but, I'm hoping that the 10%, 10 to 11, 12% is not the new normal, and that there's a way to kind of bend the curve back down.
Okay, so let's move on to, unless there's anything else. Let's move on to the revenue enhancement and expenditure reductions discussion, continuation of what we started last week.
Sure.
Whatever.
I wanted to just give an update on sort of where we are on the town side. I know at the last meeting, what I had discussed providing to all of you was a list of the town side asks and the monetary values there, the total amounts. Before I did that, I wanted to have this conversation to kind of set the stage and reset expectations appropriately, because I got some feedback that was very helpful from committee members and from members of the public, sort of asking two interrelated questions. One, are we presupposing that there's going to be an override, and as a result, are we just trying to throw things at the wall? And two, are the departmental expectations realistic given the environment that we're in? So I wanted to answer those questions and provide that sort of framing to you and to the public so that we're clear before I hand out a spreadsheet with a bunch of numbers in it. And I think maybe cause expectations to shift in a way that's not intended. Are we assuming that there's going to be an override? No. We don't make that assumption. Even in years where an override is very likely, we must prepare for a no override scenario. So we are always preparing for the event that there is no override. And in this case in particular, the reason why this committee's work started so much earlier than a typical quote unquote override committee is because the select board knew that it's not a given that the community or even the select board is going to be willing to put something on the ballot unless it's proven out. Unless we can demonstrate that there's a true need for it and that all the other sources of revenue and expenditure reduction have been exhausted. And so I want, I had hoped in kind of providing that initial spreadsheet of override wants, override asks, and in demonstrating that there just isn't a lot of headroom above continuity of effort at this early stage. That I was hoping to make clear that we don't expect that. We just want to set expectations now, given our projections, in terms of what the order of magnitude might be, where the asks are coming from, where we see in the select board office the interdepartmental priorities lying, all of those things. But there is not just an assumption at the top of this that, oh yes, we're in override territory. That needs to be proven out, and that's what the work of the committee in the fall is really about. Now that you have an understanding of where the needs are and where some sources of revenue lie, moving into expenditure reductions from here next. And then hopefully we can have that conversation about if there's a need for a gap to be met with revenues from tax revenue, then what does that number look like and what is it paying for? Do the departments understand that expectation? The answer is yes. But at the same time, I also wanted to be sure that you knew and the community knew that the departments are thinking strategically about the level of service that they provide and what the community has been asking them for. Both what is necessary, what you might not be public facing. You can see this in public works with the issues regarding forestry and all of the costs there. Those are significant costs, but there's a significant drive in the community for that level of service. And so that's what this committee's mission is really about, figuring out how to balance those drives for service with limited resources available. And so I didn't want departments do not have an expectation that this is, an opportunity to shoot for the moon and get it. But I did want to be sure that departments had an opportunity to give a full presentation to all of you on where they see both needs and wants based on what they're hearing from the community and from their own staff. So I will send around to this group the full list of departmental requests, which the departments have individually prioritized. I've also taken a pass at these and provided some commentary. For example, there are some requests that are about, that are being met in other ways. Like, for example, on the library side, keeping to the MAR, which Danielle discussed with you in her presentation. We budget for that every year, so we're meeting that. So that's not an override ask necessarily. It's just a flag in terms of where the libraries are. So I just wanted to reset those expectations, which is, yes, there are critical needs that are out there in terms of maintenance of current effort. And where possible, we will meet those with a combination of an increase in revenue and a reduction in expenditure. And I don't have, and the departments don't have an expectation that this is kind of a grab bag of potential override items. That's not how we are approaching this. So I think that feedback was really helpful. And I want to be sure that you and the public have that expectation set accordingly. With that said, I also know one of the sources of frustration here has been that we haven't talked about the reduction of expenditure side of things. You've seen that we have conservatively projected some revenue generating measures, and that the revenue generated there is not sufficient to overcome the maintenance and effort issue that we have flagged. And so there's then a question of, well, where are the reductions in services coming from? And as I said last time, unfortunately, I really do feel strongly that that's a conversation we need to have with the schools in the room. I understand that the school department already made significant reductions to their budget this past year. My concern is that I will be frank with you, I don't want the town balancing the school's budget. I don't think that's fair to the town departments. And so I really want this discussion to be, when we talk about reductions, I want both sides present at the table. I don't want the town unilaterally recommending reductions in service to balance the school budget. That's just not, given the amount of effort that's going into this, I don't think that's appropriate. And so while I apologize for not being able to put that on the table, that's really where we are at this point. I want to give the schools the opportunity to do that work and to come back and be a part of this collaborative process together. And right now their focus is on opening the schools, which I totally understand. But that unfortunately means that I can't then be out here unilaterally saying, okay, I have $3.1 million in cuts for you. And that solves our problem and some of the school's problem. And then when the time comes to have that discussion with the schools, the answer is, well, you've already made the cuts we need to make, so no cuts.
Sergio.
Fair enough.
Oh, sorry. Did you have your hand up?
No, I just said, fair enough.
Sergio.
So I have to confess that in listening to you, Chaz, on this point about having the quote schools unquote in the room, I agree 100%. My confusion is who in fact are the appropriate representatives? Is it the school committee? They certainly have never come before us. Is it the administration? Well, we have met with certain key members of the administration. Perhaps you might help us better understand your view on that point.
I think it's got to be that staff to staff, which is why I'm not trying to cast aspersions on the school team for where they are, right? Superintendent has come into this with a very difficult task at hand. She's got to open the schools and be ready for business. And she just got started and had one member of senior staff when she got started. So I totally understand why schools are not in the position the town is because they don't have the people, they didn't have the people. The people they do have are still getting their feet under them. And they've got to then be able to conduct the same kind of analysis that we're in the process of conducting in terms of, okay, where are potential efficiencies and what are the impact operations? And so I want to give them the time to do that. I also have been kind of emphasizing to this group, to the school committee, to the administration that we're on a deadline here. So ultimately, we don't have infinite amount of time. We really need, by the time schools open, to pivot hard to this and have this conversation as soon as possible.
So just to follow up, I think that's the second part of a problem that we've all, on the committee at least, I think have been struggling with is timing. And everything you've said about the school situation and the burden that the current administrators are carrying, I understand and I agree with 100%. And it's clear that that is the priority for them to get the school year underway. But it implies, I think, that we're really looking into late fall, if not further, before they have the opportunity to answer some of the questions that we've posed. And more importantly, to come to grips with the kind of discussion and frank discussion, which I think you are suggesting and which I believe is required of everybody. I don't know what to do about that.
I think it's worthwhile for us in the next meeting that we have, which is scheduled for the end of this month. And will hopefully be, given that it's right before school opening, even if we don't have a sense of answers to some of these questions, we at least have a better sense of timeline. And we have that really in-depth, I think, discussion about what do the next couple months look like? What are each of our next sessions look like? What are the deliverables? Who's delivering them? And then, framing out what this committee's report is going to say. As right now, as we discuss internally, I envision this committee's report to focus on the structure, which is the discussion we had in the first half of this conversation, opportunities for revenue enhancement and expense reduction, and then any final recommendation in terms of not just are we putting a ballot question on, but are we, for example, recommending an enhancement to the town school partnership in some way? Are we recommending structural changes? All of those questions that are, I think, more fundamental than just this question of is there an override question on the ballot?
Sure, but again, I think to the point that many have made, such a restructuring of that school-town partnership requires the participation actively of our colleagues on the school side, and they obviously have other immediate tasks. So I'm concerned that the promise that has been suggested, which is that this committee is going to have reports and recommendations on the time scale that I think have been suggested, may not be realistic, and that we need to consider that perhaps as part of our discussion of the schedule that you proposed. Thank you.
I agree with Sergio. I'm sort of thinking about the working backwards timeline, and it would I think it's challenging given the data that we have right now and the work that needs to be done. And so I think it's important for us to just lay that out really explicitly, insert some milestones of what we need by when for that to be viable, and see if the schools and others can meet it.
Okay, anything else on this?
I do have a question on the information that is available out there. And this maybe Melissa and Chaz is directed at you. At one time, the positions on the town side at least, and maybe on the school side, were reported. And that seems to not be available or is, it's about a year or two ago. The number of positions that are funded in the budget seems to have been dropped from the available information or.
No, we have FTE counts in our budget book and we also have position control. Yeah, we have that.
So-
It's probably just in a different place.
Is it all the other total numbers?
Yeah.
So
there.
positions and salaries are available
Yes.
for,
Yep, and we still maintain the personnel sheets that, now that we use OpenGov, the format is just different, but the information, the base information is still there.
in the budget book.
Yes, it's just presented differently.
In
For
the
the
written
town.
budget book or
Yeah,
the online budget?
Is
book?
it? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, for the town.
Pardon me?
for the town.
For the town. What about the school side?
So getting the FTE number has been a challenge. And so I think we would probably want to ask them the question about what they have available.
One point on the schools, I tried to find the school's budget that was revised. I've got the school's original ask, which is $8 million out, but I can't find anywhere school's budget, the current, presumably approved budget. And the kind of, and I don't know what normally happens, whether it's in the kind of detail the town side.
Is it in the combined reports?
So I'm not sure that they put out a book in the way that they had before, but I think they did publish a document. But whether or not it got updated after the request, we can check to see what they have.
We received something in the, it was more a spreadsheet of where they started and it was updated. And then the final cuts that they made, which I think ties to what's in the combined report. I remember looking at it. I don't remember how understandable it was, but it took this is where the cuts were and came down to a final number, but it was very global, so that wouldn't have the positions or anything that you're looking for in terms of detail.
Well, I believe that, Susan has been working hard to have a personnel system in place. And, she may have reasonable information for us to take a look at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
But-
I guess my point is that it would be useful to see what has happened over the last 5 years,
That's not
10
gonna
years
happen.
in terms of.
That's not gonna happen. You're not gonna, so I can tell you that it is my belief that we will be told that what is in place now cannot be compared to what we had before. And so, it's gonna be an apples and oranges type of discussion.
Cliff, can't we get a budget?
They have.
Because if you go to Budget Central on the Brookline Public Schools website, you don't get a budget.
Right.
The last thing in there is a presentation of the budget.
So that gets to the question that Janet asked. I mean, I don't believe they produced a budget, separate document like they did in January after the votes in May. I just don't believe they
But it
did.
must be somewhere.
That's why I asked you to combine reports. Maybe I have not seen it.
No, why? It's not there.
No, what we have is, this is where they were
No, I know,
$8
I know what they gave
Yeah,
here, but,
right.
I think the combined reports probably has the most detail. at this
Yeah, I
point.
mean, they used
That's
to give
why-
addendums, but they didn't. So I'm not sure what they have.
They're all gone. Ran out of Dodge. Okay, so let me, I will write Mariah tonight, and see if she has anything. But I don't think, and the reason I say that is because Susan has essentially said she doesn't have access to historical data.
And that historical data is non-existent or lost.
It's in a different format.
So she had to rebuild the roster. And so what she's going off is of what she built. And so she does not have the same level of detail that she currently has built.
But there is some detail, presumably historical detail. You said there are no counts at all.
It sounds like the last couple of years before she got here, she does not have data for it.
And
Where
there's
would
no,
she build her data from?
I think she started from
Started from
scratch and basically went to all the principals and rebuilt the roster.
and things that used to be budgeted under X became budgeted under Y. So if you do get the data, you're not looking at apples and oranges, you're looking at fruits and pears.
Has the school ever been audited, school's budget?
Budget.
What our
Well, the
auditors have, to-
expenditures, whatever.
our auditors look at their.
Yeah, they do. They test the data there.
But what auditors
They
don't
don't
go
get it.
into that level
Yeah.
of detail, and there's certainly, I mean, they're doing testing. That shows that what you're spending makes sense. And that it's in line with the years before. The schedule I always hated was the one that said, anything over this amount of money that changed by this percentage, tell us why. Always drove me crazy.
So essentially, the school department is flying an aircraft where all the displays are connected to nothing.
So I think that, I think the focus needs to be on getting the projections going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is that she
Yeah.
has the base.
Yeah.
And so she needs time in order to make sure that, she can confidently project what the needs are in the next 3 years.
And how long do you think that's going to be? Do you think?
I mean, that's a question for her. I mean, I don't know where she is in that
Sorry.
process. Sorry.
Right now, as we've been told, they're focused on getting school open, which
Right.
is in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Right after Labor Day, and that's a huge challenge, and knowing who's showing up, because the changes in enrollment go all the way through. I mean, I remember this back from when I was on advisory, so
I'm not very saying that we're going to get anything real soon.
There's no one to give it to.
and everybody who's there is starting from the same scratch. They're not dealing from, well, I remember this is what it was, and this is
Well,
my
the principals,
the principals, but I meant at the central administration level. They don't have history to call on, and they're all interim.
We did not, this budget year, we did not get a 3-year projection from them. We got 26. So we got nothing for 27 or 28. We didn't have that from them. The last 3-year projection we had was when Ruth Ann was here.
Because that was the override number and that
Right.
fell short.
Right, because of special ed.
Right.
Which is
Leaving aside-
hard to budget for.
Leaving aside the budget, do we know what they spent in each account?
Yeah, wouldn't that be in the government? But I mean,
So the school side of the ledger is a foreign place for me. So I don't know how to run reports on the school side. I only know how to run town reports.
but it's in there because it's all gone through, but people got paid. And that's how you know what's been spent, is that people got paid.
We also got sued for people not being paid.
But that was the problem that I believe they resolved, that people weren't being paid timely because they didn't have contracts and all of that good stuff. But by June 30 of 2025, anything that had to be paid, or I don't know if you still are doing close up from accruals or whatever, but the real data is what got paid.
I think she's working on a report to the school committee on how they ended the year.
Yeah.
So that's something that we should make sure that we get a copy of what she provides the school committee.
Good.
Susan Gibbons.
It's a
always
real
been a
problem,
problem.
because if we go to the voters and saying, give us your money, because we've got these great things, we've got to keep the lights on, we've got some extra programs. And they say, well, what happened to the last, somebody sits in the meeting, there's going to be meetings, and you ask questions about the past, and they say, well, we haven't got to go to, well, we don't have that information. What level of confidence we're going to engender in the voting public to vote for a road provider?
There's information in that there's dollars and cents that go into DESI. So you at least have that, correct? I think if it were me walking in, I'd want to be assured that the problems that existed in 2025 have been addressed. And this is what we've done, and this is how we're going forward. You can't undo the mess And I think it's just a waste of, it's not just a waste of our time and it would keep us from getting to where we have to go. It's just, it's not gonna happen.
But I do think a fair question is, if enrollment numbers are constant or
Right.
declining and the number of personnel are going up substantially, why? How do you justify that? Is that happening? And I honestly don't know whether that's the case.
Which brings us to another point about DESI. I looked at DESI numbers, I looked at PSB numbers for enrollment, and they're different. They're all different I went back to SY 23, and they're all different. They're not hugely out, but I mean, they're not the same number, which surprised me because the DESI number is a PSB number, comes from PSB. And yet what's published in all the materials that we have about enrollment, which is several presentations I've seen, have different numbers.
You said enrollment or staff,
Enrollment.
but enrollment changes throughout the year.
year.
Well, I understand that. but I mean,
It does say it's a one
but
day.
if you're calculating cost per student, right, which is I was trying to do, which by the way is $31,000 a year, right? That I want to know how that's trending, what's contributing to that, and we can determine that number without all those details. But when the enrollment number it changes, not a huge amount, but it does change, and one would like to be accurate. Which number is correct? Why is the decimal number?
Because that's only once a year.
I know, but then that's
It's
when
not updated.
that's fine. But when we're looking at comparables, I tend, like most of us around here, to look at DESI. Because that's
all-
where
that's all you
everyone's
can
putting
look at.
into. So I would
That's all you
say
can
maybe
look
it's just a caveat, asterisk, but when we look at school numbers, we use the DESI numbers.
Yeah, and show how inaccurate that could be in terms of.
So what? Generally speaking, when but the subcommittee did not do a presentation this year, but generally speaking, there is an update on enrollment mid-year, like January, and that's always presented at advisory. We always go October, January, and then they use the January numbers as the base for their projections for the following year. So, I mean, we at advisory get that information. The public has that information whenever the school committee gets it, because it's presented to the school committee. They're not updating it every week or every month.
No, I understand that, but I'm just trying to get, when you've got numbers, you try to be consistent. Someone says, where'd you get that number from? Well, because if you're from PSB, it'll be a different number on this spreadsheet here that I'm calculating, because I'm using DESI.
So there is.
And the reason I use DESI is I looked at PSB and it was different. And I thought, well, I mean, it's not a huge amount, but it's like you'd like to be accurate.
But so you can make a decision. I'm only going to be using October 1st numbers to do my calculations. That's
Right.
fine.
But when it comes to this committee, I think we should probably adopt the same kind of thing. And when we're looking at the school numbers, that we basically use DESI as our guide, but we need to understand the minutiae perhaps in a certain area.
Yeah.
And we need to go to PSB for that because it won't be in the DESI files, or it won't be as up to date.
And they will only update things a few times a year, because we've asked for updated information. They're basically they basically said October 1st.
Yeah,
That's the next update you're gonna get.
Yeah.
Because enrollment, this churn comes September. People come in late.
Oh, yeah, no, I understand. Yeah.
So
Some enrollment, leave.
So your staffing, I mean, if we take special ed off, because that will change in the course of the year, correct? But the expenses should be the expenses should be the same, other than special ed. And if you're looking for a cost per pupil, you're dealing with a denominator that changes. So you've got, I spent $10,000. That's what my budget says. It's going to be $10,000, and I have 3 students. And then the next time I have another kid in the class. So, I'm not sure what you're asking, John. You're asking for a level of specificity that.
No, it's not specificity, it's consistency. In other words, if we're choosing to present numbers, as we surely will, then all I'm saying is that numbers differ, there's all kinds of issues with dates and let's forget about DESI, there are other issues as well, but we need to, when we're looking at numbers on spreadsheets, which we do, that we are aware of the source and what the kind of unit is essentially.
So I'm gonna recommend.
That's all I'm saying.
I'm gonna
It stops from
recommend-
using
so
it.
I'm gonna recommend that what we use is what the schools use in their projections.
Yeah.
Okay, because we're only gonna DESI for 1
Their
year.
projections have been noted or repaired, and enrollment have been out of whack since 2019.
Well, they've been relatively close the last year. They're never gonna be 100%. It's just not gonna happen.
An awful lot.
But
has
that's the way
changed.
they're budgeting.
Well.
And one of the things that Dr. Gibbons said that he doesn't know how to until later figure out is what's gonna happen because of what's happening in Washington and if we're not getting the level of foreign. I mean, there's so many things that impact it and it's fairly fluid.
But
So I agree with Flip. We have to, if, as Sarah said, we need to establish a level of trust. I would focus on, we know these were the problems. We had a report on that. This is their report on what they're doing to address those problems. We have a level of confidence or not that that's happening. And based on that, and this is how they're going forward, and these are their projections.
So
Because looking backwards is just gonna put us down the same rabbit hole we were in.
to combine a bunch of thoughts here, as Sergio pointed out, the schools are busy right now. We're not going to get much out of it. As Chaz has mentioned in a prior meeting, we have like the end of the year is our drop dead, right? We don't want to say anything after 12/31. We'd really like to say things before. If we start bringing those two arms together, do we need to up our schools? We need this data by this time, because if we don't say that, we're gonna run right into, we're not gonna get this information by the time we need it. And we can still say, we recommend these expenditure improvements or revenue improvements or whatever. But if we really want to talk about an override, which is where John was going, we're gonna need this data at some drop dead date. I think it's good for us to think about when this.
Susan told us that enrollment number is October. She will tell us what they know as of when
Yeah,
school
but-
opens, but the reject,
Yeah, but even that doesn't.
it's gonna change.
It's irrelevant. What's relevant is what they use for their budget project for forecasts. And whether or not we're gonna get a 3-year forecast from her is, that's really,
But they're looking at enrollment trends in particular to gauge the number of teachers that you need to hire. I mean, it's a fundamental ratio.
but they do that, John.
They do, and
Well,
she even said there's a wiggle room, and she told us where she stuck it, because I don't know at this point where I'm gonna need the classes, but I have a feeling I'm gonna need classes. That was part of her presentation to us.
Okay, let's send this. Our next meeting's on the 26th, at 4 p.m. I assume right here.
And in advance of that, we will have the FTEs, the counts of the FTEs on our side. Have the spreadsheet of the town asks, now that I've given the explanatory preface. I will, there's also some work that we're doing in response to Nick's question from last time about sustainability, and about what other communities are doing on that front. And so all of that information, in addition to any other information that the committee might need from us, we're happy to provide. So just, if there's stuff in addition to that that you want or need, please tell us, that we can circulate that to you as far in advance as we can.
Great, thank you.
Very quickly, Chaz, you may want that explanatory preface to be in writing at the front of that document as well.
That's where it's going. Yes.
Thank you.
This is the 4:30 meeting.
I think that's
It's
when
4 o'clock.
4 yeah. And can we get that stuff with enough time to look at it? So
Yes, I apologize. Yeah, we're trying, that's what I'm trying to avoid. I didn't want to drop this on you on Monday afternoon in advance of this meeting. And I wanted to give you the preface and then give you time to digest. So yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.